Hello, this is Ross Bliley from the podcast Pigskin Tales. This podcast is sponsored by Sterling Soap Company. With products sold throughout 41 locations around the globe, Sterling Soap Company has a unique assortment of products to choose from for your loved one for the holidays. Handmade artisan soaps created by Roderick and Amanda Lovin since 2012, these products are affordable and provide great value. Act now and save on your shipping costs. If you purchase $75 or more, your shipping cost is free in the United States. Shop now online at sterlingsoap.com.
Hey there, sports history fans. We've got some exciting news to share with you. 6 of our podcasts from the Sports History Network have made it to the final round of voting for the prestigious Sports Podcast Awards. Here are their shows and the categories. Historically Speaking Sports and This Day in Sports History are both competing for Best Sports Talk Podcast. No Nonsense Old School Weightlifting History is in the running for Best Fitness, Health, and Wellbeing Podcast. When Football Was Football is up for Best Sports Documentary Podcast. Wrestling with Heels On has entered the ring for Best Wrestling Podcast. And Shoulder Roll Virtual Boxing is fighting for the title for Best Combat Sports Podcast. Now, of course, we need your help to take home the championship for each of these awesome shows. All you gotta do is head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/vote and cast your vote for your favorite shows, or better yet, all 6 of them. Again, every vote counts, and we gotta show the world how much sports history really matters. So thank you for your support and making Sports History Network the headquarters for sports yesteryear. But again, don't wait. You gotta go vote now. That's over at sportshistorynetwork.com/vote.
This is Basketball History 101 with Rick Loayza.
Welcome back to Award-winning Basketball History 101, part of the Sports History Network. I'm your host, Rick Loayza, and this is the podcast where we bring to life some of the forgotten stories from basketball history. We are bringing old school basketball to a new school audience. And today we bring you the second part of our interview with author Bob Kuska, where we continue our discussion on his new book, Balls of Confusion: Pro Basketball Goes to War, 1965 to 1970. And this book covers the first 5 years of the ABA and its attempt to take on the established NBA. So without further ado, let's jump right back into our interview. Now, I did a story way back on Moses Malone, and I referred to him as the last ABA player because he was the last player in the NBA. It was like 1989, 88, 89. He was the last player still playing in the NBA with ABA experience. And so when he retired, he was the last ABA player. And they took him straight from high school. And that must have gotten a pretty serious reaction, not only from basketball fans, basketball reporters, but even the NBA probably was thinking, hey, that's going too far. That's crossing a line, taking a kid from high school.
Yeah, one thing I should point out is, before I answer your question, is that Balls of Confusion is actually published in 2 parts.
Okay.
So the book that's going to be coming out in November, it lays out the origin of this war. So it lays down... though I do write about players and what it was like on the court, this book is really about the business of basketball during this period. It's about the business war among the owners and their attempt to popularize the game. And so I had so much information on this topic that I didn't want to just kind of squeeze it all into one book. I just have too much.
Yeah.
And so the first part goes, as you mentioned earlier, goes from 1965. Now the ABA didn't start in 65, but it was the first big rookie contract, and that's the contract that Cassie Russell got with the New York Knicks for a different reason. But I go up to 1970. So Moses Malone is very much going to fall in the next book.
Yeah, right.
That's already about 3/4 written but it's not going to be in this book that comes out in November. But what happened? One of the things about the ABA is the sort of the West Coast group's goal of merging with the NBA became predominant, and so they wanted to just use this league and merge, and as that kind of they ran into some trouble. There was a lawsuit, the famous Robertson lawsuit, and Balls of Confusion is going to be the first book that goes and tells the whole story about the Robertson suit. I talked to David Stern about the Robertson case, and at the end of the interview, I said, I just got to ask you, have you ever talked to anybody about the Robertson case? Have you talked to reporters about the Robertson case? And he said, no, you're the first.
Oh my word!
David Stern died a year later.
Right, and he was not only obviously commissioner of the NBA, but at the time of the Robertson case, he was the lead legal counsel for the NBA.
Yeah, right. And so I've talked to all the lawyers. I know all this. I know the strategy. I know all that's gone into it. But that's never been adequately reported, and that's why I just couldn't squeeze it into just one book.
Absolutely, I get it.
So getting back to answering your question is that the ABA then got kind of stuck with the Robertson case, and that they legally couldn't get they needed an antitrust exemption to merge, and the NBA then started dragging its feet. The NBA never really wanted to merge with the NBA. I mean, they realized that there was a segment of the NBA that felt like, yeah, we have to do it, but there are many who felt that, look, we don't want to reward these guys for going to war against us. We want to destroy them. We don't want to become partners with them. And so as that kind of droned on for a while, the ABA kind of lost its way. What I always argue is you can kind of follow the ABA and its evolution by just looking at the commissioner at the time. So you just track the commissioners, and we'll show you the mindset of the ABA. Early on with George Mikan, for example, they're trying to establish the league. So they lived off of his credibility to establish the league. But as a part of that, what was absolutely crucial, and it was the ABA wanted a television contract to help subsidize the league and keep it going and force the NBA to merge. But Mikan couldn't get the contract. He just couldn't get it done. So what did they do? They fired him, and they brought in Jack Dolph, who was the head of sports at CBS. And it's always been sort of a mystery as to why Dolph couldn't ever come up with get the ABA on CBS, since that's why he was hired. That's his old network. That's where he's plugged into. I got the answer, which has never really been adequately disclosed. It's all in this first version of the first segment of Balls of Confusion. But when Dolph doesn't get that, then it's all about the merger. And who do they bring in? They bring in Bob Carlson, who is Roy Bowe, the owner of the New York Nets, his attorney. And so Carlson comes in to try to negotiate this merger agreement. That doesn't happen. So then the ABA decides, well, we'll take another run, see if we can just exist as a league with our red, white, and blue ball and catch on. So they bring in Mike Storin, who is the GM. He'd started out in the league from day one with Indiana. Then he moved over to Kentucky, and so he knew the league. He was a publicity guy, and he gave it a shot for a year. And then he decided that he thought that the merger was about to happen, and so, but he wanted a team because he wanted to get into the NBA on the cheap. So he dashes off to Memphis to get that Memphis franchise. So who do they bring in? They bring in Ted Munchak, who at that time had been the owner of the Carolina Cougars, who's getting out, who actually has sort of an underhanded agenda sort of under his cap, which will all be detailed in the second volume of Balls of Confusion. But right around that time, the league had kind of lost its way, and they didn't know whether it could continue on. So this is about year 7. of the ABA. So they just didn't know whether the league could survive or not. And so it was truly because the league had always been a league of haves and have-nots, but the haves were finally saying, well, shoot, we got to cut bait and get rid of the have-nots, and we got to do what we can to see about getting into the NBA. And so there was just sort of this period of, we don't really know how to go forward. And that was the summer that the ABA signed David Thompson, or the Denver Nuggets signed David Thompson and Marvin Webster, with the idea that Denver was going to the NBA. They were signing these players to get into the NBA, not the ABA. But the other teams didn't quite know what to do. And at that time, finally, to answer your question, Utah was about to go under. Their owner, Bill Daniels, was dead broke. He was living in a Howard Johnson's in Salt Lake City, and he couldn't. In lieu of paying for his room, he would give the employees tickets to games.
Oh wow!
And so Daniels was dead broke, but he loved the team, and so he was trying desperately to sell the Utah Stars, and he briefly did. Daniels sold the team, and that ownership group would fall apart, and Daniels would come back in, but because of this, his need to sell the team, the group who came in a little bit late, and through a total fluke, and again I have the story. The Stars had just drafted, with no intent of signing him, Moses Malone, and he was their top draft pick. So they said, "Okay, we'll sign him, since we have to have an attraction if we're going to continue with the Utah Stars. We need some sort of attraction." So they signed him, and again the thinking was, well, this couldn't be a bad thing, because we'll get players before. If we sign high school kids, we'll get players before the NBA can get them.
Right.
So it's to our advantage.
Yeah. I mean, the whole ABA, I mean, they did, I think from a business perspective, they were doing everything as best as they could, but the one thing that seemed to hamper them, and you said this already, the lack of a TV contract was really hard. And I always questioned the strategy of putting some of their teams in NBA cities. I always thought that the ABA would have done better of keeping their teams in non-NBA cities. But I mean,
but they had to be in New York.
That was
again, they had to communicate with the network. So at that time, it was the three networks.
Yeah.
And so they had to be in New York to be big time. Now, what happened originally is there was going to be a New York team. As long as I got the whole story in balls of confusion. There's going to be a New York team, but they were blocked. So they were going to play in one of the old armories. So they weren't going to get into Madison Square Garden. That's where the Knicks play. But they were going to play in some of the armory. The Knicks, prior to Madison Square Garden, had played in these old armories. Mm-hmm. So that the Nets, they were going to be called the Freighters. We're going to go into this army, but they got blocked, and they couldn't prove it. But it's pretty clear that Madison Square Garden, which owned the Knicks, they weren't going to allow the competition to happen. So they had to move the team to Teaneck, New Jersey, across the river to Teaneck, in a little armory there. But they were outside of Manhattan, and that was to keep them out of the news and not directly challenge the Knicks. And they did have a team. They wanted a team in Los Angeles, and they had a team. The Utah Stars, prior to Salt Lake City, were in Los Angeles, or the Anaheim Amigos, for a season. And then they when Jack Kent Cooke moved the Lakers into the Forum, the Amigos, who weren't doing well in Orange County, moved into Los Angeles and went head to head, and it wasn't going to go well for them because they didn't have any players to compete against. Will Chamberlain, Elgin Baylor, Jerry West at the time. They didn't have the star factor, which is crucial in Los Angeles. Obviously there was also competition in the Bay Area in San Francisco and Oakland. In fact, the Warriors were playing in Oakland Coliseum at the time because there wasn't a good facility in San Francisco. And there was that direct competition. But basketball just was not that popular in the Bay Area at the time. They were more familiar with the college sport. Franklin Muley, who owned the Warriors for years, he struggled. And in fact, and this is all in balls of confusion, he almost sold the team to San Diego interests. And so today's Golden State Warriors. In fact, the reason they are called the Golden State Warriors, so they originally had been the San Francisco Warriors, and you think of those cable car or the Golden Gate Bridge cable car uniforms. And the reason that they changed the name to Golden State is because the idea was Muley was going to sell the team to an interest in San Diego to play there, but they would also play in cities like Fresno and Bakersfield and so on. So they were going to be the Golden State, a regional franchise. But Muley, who had worked out the deal to sell the team, Al Addles told me this. Told me that he just couldn't sign the papers, and he held on to them.
Oh wow!
But that's why they're called the Golden State Warriors.
Yeah. Well, this has. I'm looking forward to reading the book. I love the whole story of the ABA and the battles with the NBA and how that all came to eventually ended with the merger, but after 9 years of existence and going after the same pool of players, trying to go in some cases going after the same fan base in certain cities. But I wish we had, and I say this a lot in my podcast whenever I talk about the ABA, is it's such a shame that more of these games weren't televised or recorded, because there was some really great basketball played there that we can't go back and see anymore.
Yeah, I talked with Carl Scheer, who he actually has a very interesting story. He'd gotten out of law school, and he joined a firm in Greensboro, North Carolina. So he had gone to college at I believe it was University of Vermont, but he ended up at this firm in Greensboro. And so he described himself as a gopher, that whenever the partners in this law firm needed documents, he would go to the county courthouse, request them, and just wait for them to be delivered. Then he'd go back to the law firm as this junior lawyer and drop them off. So he was bored stiff. And on the side, he started broadcasting the Guilford College basketball games because Scheer had been a player. I believe he played at Vermont. And so he was broadcasting the games, and just by chance, Guilford had a player who did this isn't even, memory serves correctly, this is not even NCAA basketball, this is NAIA basketball. They had a guy named Bob Kaufman, who's a forward, who the NBA had its sights on. And so Kaufman is getting contacted by agents and teams and asked if he what he planned to do in playing pro ball. And so at that time, college coaches didn't want, it was anathema to move out of this amateur realm of college basketball into the pro game. Some coaches did, but generally speaking, that wasn't the case. And so you had players like Bob Kaufman, who suddenly they'd gone through college, and suddenly they have the pros knocking on their door, and they don't know what to do, and their college coach doesn't really want to get involved. But Kaufman figured that he needed to get a lawyer to help him negotiate his contract. And so he could only think of one lawyer that he knew, Carl Scheer, who broadcast their games. So he went to Scheer and said, "Hey, I need a lawyer. Could you help negotiate my contract?" So Carl Scheer did. He said, "Yeah, I'll do it." And Kaufman got drafted by the Seattle Supersonics, and who were owned by a guy named Sam Schulman, who's a huge figure in all of this. So Kaufman goes out with Scheer to Los Angeles to a party that Schulman is holding. Schulman lives in the hoity-toity part of Los Angeles. He's involved in film distribution, so he's in with the stars. So Schulman is throwing a party, and actress Doris Day is there, and all these stars are. And as Carl Scheer told me, he's trying to act cool and like this is no big deal, but he's just swooning that he's amid all these Hollywood stars. So he being Carl Scheer faked out Schulman. And Schulman, at the time, was still had a decent relationship with NBA Commissioner Walter Kennedy. And Kennedy started to complain that he needed an assistant. He needed a deputy commissioner. And so Schulman said, "Well, why don't you take this guy, Carl Scheer? I just negotiated a contract with him to sign my top draft choice. And I seem like a really good guy." So Scheer went from a guy who was a junior lawyer in a law firm in Greensboro, North Carolina, to he wasn't technically the deputy commissioner of the NBA, but he was Walter Kennedy's number 2 guy, and he did that for a while. Then he became briefly the general manager of the expansion Buffalo Braves. Then he jumped out to become the general manager of the Carolina Cougars. And so he did that for a while until the Cougars kind of went down the drain. Then he went off to Denver, and that's where he established the Denver Nuggets. Without Carl Scheer, you might not have a Denver Nuggets today. I mean, he was very organized and did it the right way. But what Carl Scheer told me is that by the end of the ABA, the only value that the league really had were its players. They had Julius Erving, all the players who come to mind, the great ABA players. The NBA wasn't interested in any of the ABA cities. They weren't trying to get into Kentucky. They weren't trying to get into Indiana, and they didn't want to bring in the Virginia Squires or any teams that were considered to be weak and kind of a burden on them. So that's all the ABA had. It didn't have a TV contract, as you mentioned, and that's all they were able to leverage in the end. So.
Well, Bob, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of these old stories and letting us know what we can expect from Balls of Confusion. I'm excited for when it comes out in November. I really want to thank you for your time and what is very clear to me is your deep research into this topic. I mean, it seems like you leave no stone unturned in digging through this story to give that and present that to us.
Yeah, no, I have just gathered a lot of stories. I mean, I've really kind of just scratched the surface, and I really recommend if you care about this era, this is really the book for you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great stuff that's out there now, but this will only be helpful.
Right. Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to it. All right. Well, thank you again.
Okay. Good. My pleasure.
We want to thank Bob Kuska for his time and sharing his love of basketball with us. You can find his book on Amazon, and we will include the link in the show description. The book is called Balls of Confusion, Pro Basketball Goes to War, 1965 to 1970. Until next time, This is Basketball History 101, part of the Sports History Network, the headquarters of Sports Yesteryear. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com to find out more about this and other sports history podcasts. If you like what you hear, please hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcast. And check out our page on Facebook. It's called Basketball History 101 Podcast. There you will find shorter historical posts as well as comments and discussion starters on today's game. We will also announce there when new episodes come out. I want to thank my producer and editor, Jacob Loayza. Join us each week as we continue to mine the history of basketball for more great stories from the past. Take care and see you soon.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
At the Sports History Network, we're all about sports yesteryear, and so we're so pleased to introduce you to Row One, an online memorabilia gallery and shop that brings your sports history to life anywhere. The Row One gallery includes over 5,200 gorgeously reproduced prints of team posters, game program covers, game tickets, advertisements, and more in baseball, pro and college football, pro and college basketball, and more. And any gallery item may be printed in a variety of sizes on wood, metal, canvas, acrylic, or poster paper. And in Row One shop, check out the thousands more of unique items with the retro and historical designs dating back to 1876, including t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, phone cases, mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com, ROW1, for access to the full Row One catalog and for gallery prints and gift items, plus get a 15% discount off all prints on the Row One Pictorium Gallery with coupon code SHN15. Follow the link on the show notes.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.
Hello, sports history fans. I'm Ross from the podcast Pigskin Tales. You're about to jump into another thrilling sports history moment. But first, let's dive into today's sponsor, just in time for the holiday season. Introducing Art of Words, the brainchild of word artist Dan Duffy from Philadelphia. Dan meticulously crafts stunning images by handwriting relevant words from some of the greatest sports moments in time. These unique budget-friendly illustrations are the perfect gift, sparking cherished memories and capturing hearts. Choose from city skylines, sports, history, and musicians to find a piece for everyone. And here's the exciting part. For that sports fanatic in your life, gift them a piece of their favorite team or player's history. Art of Words tells a compelling story. Explore collegiate stadiums, each meticulously crafted with every football victory etched into words. Or venture into baseball stadiums, handwritten with every player from the team's illustrious history. My favorite on the site is Bryce Harper 2021 MVP year. Because I'm a big stats guy, I think that's one of the coolest things ever. Check it out. Don't wait. Order a print today for yourself and your loved one this holiday season. Transform your wall into a gallery of captivating art and surprise your family and friends with a print of their own. Use code SHN15 at artofwords.com for a 15% discount on your order in November and December. Visit Art of Words, where words magically transform into stunning art, evoking cherished memories and touching the hearts of those who you care about. Again, use the code SHN15 for 15% off at artofwords.com.